I used to make up at bright light.
Hello friends, my name is Skelly, and I'm going to tell you very important information about the Celts. The Iron Age is the age of the Celts in Britain. The question is, who were these Celts? The Celts were warring tribes that gradually infiltrated Britain over the course of the centuries between about 500 and 100 BC. There was probably never an organized Celtic invasion. Actually, it would have been impossible since they spent their free time fighting among themselves. The Romans described them as barbarian, but we mustn't forget they were the winners, and history written by the winners is always suspect. In fact, the term barbarians doesn't account for the magnificence of their art. The Celts were a group of peoples loosely tied by similar language, religion, and cultural expression. They were not centrally governed. It would have been impossible since they were too quarrelsome, as I said before. They were warriors, living for the glories of battle and plunder. They were also the people who brought iron working to the British Isles. The use of iron changed trade and fostered local independence because iron was relatively cheap and available almost everywhere. During the Celtic period, Britain saw a huge growth in the number of hill forts. These were often made up by a ditch and a bank which surrounded a hilltop and were built to defend it. Some hill forts were very small and were useful to an individual family, though over time many larger forts were built. The basic unit of Celtic life was the clan, a sort of extended family. Clans were bound together very loosely with other clans into tribes, each of which had its own social structure and customs, and possibly its own local gods. The Celts lived in huts of arched timber with thatched roofs. Many huts made up a hamlet. Many tribes had their own coinage system. When they weren't fighting, the Celts were farmers. One of their farming innovations was the iron plow. The iron plow generally required a team of 8 oxen to be pulled. For this reason, Celtic fields tended to be long and narrow, as it can still be seen in some parts of the country today. Celtic lands were collectively owned. Therefore, wealth was not based on land ownership, but on the number of cattle herd owned. Women's condition was better than in most societies of that time, since they were almost equal to men, owned property, and could choose their own husbands. They could also be war leaders, like the woman warrior Boudica, or Boadicea. The Celts relied on oral transmission of culture, primarily through the efforts of bards and poets. Much of what we know of their traditions comes to us today through the old tales and poems that were handed down for generations, before eventually being written down. The Druids were a sort of priests, political advisors, teachers, healers, and arbitrators. They had their own universities, where traditional knowledge was passed on by rote. They had the right to speak ahead of the king in council, and may have held more authority than the king. They acted as ambassadors in time of war. They composed verse and upheld the law. They were a sort of intellectuals. The Druids held many of their religious ceremonies in woodland groves and near sacred water, such as wells and springs. The Romans speak of human sacrifice as being a part of Celtic religion. The only thing we know for sure is that the Celts revered human heads. Celtic warriors beheaded their opponents in battle, since it was considered a sign of prowess and social standing to have a goodly number of heads to display. They did this in order to catch the spiritual power of the enemy. Believe it or not, it was a kind of religious ceremony. The Celts loved war. During war fights they arrayed themselves as fiercely as possible, sometimes charging into battle fully naked, dyed blue from head to toe, and screaming, like specters, to frighten their enemies. They also cared about their appearance in battle, and wore decorated weapons and equipment, like golden shields, and ornamented helmets and trumpets. The Celts also used light chariots in warfare. From this chariot, drawn by 2 horses, they used to throw spears at an enemy before alighting and brandish the sword, as you can see in the picture. Terrific people the Celts, weren't they? So long friends, we shall meet very soon for another amazing video on the history of the British Isles. That's a promise. Bye bye.